Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz lately.
hmm
The role of HR in today's companies.
Mm.
Specifically, we've been hearing from a lot of you about this idea, this feeling that HR often seems to be on the side of management. Rather than really advocating for employees, is HR really a friend or foe?
Right.
So to explore that, we're going to dissect a recent controversy, this one involving a company called YesMadam. And we're going to be using articles from Inks 42, ABP News Bureau, Mint, the Indian Express, and Business Standard to kind of unpack all this.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating case. It really brings up some fundamental questions about, what is HR supposed to be doing? How should they handle employee well-being? And even the ethics of PR in this kind of crazy social media world we live in.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. Yes, Madam, it's a salon-at-home startup, sends out an employee survey
Mhm.
asking about stress levels.
hmm
Pretty standard so far, right?
Yeah.
But then things take a pretty sharp turn. They allegedly fire over 100 employees, the ones who reported high stress.
Wow. And it's not even just the firings that are raising eyebrows. It's how they did it. One of the employees, Anushka Dutta, she actually shared the email on LinkedIn and, get this, it said they were letting go of the stressed employees. Quote, to ensure that no one remains stressed at work, end quote.
Seriously, they actually said that. The logic is just, I don't even know.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and you can see why people are just furious. I mean, this incident really seems to confirm this suspicion that a lot of people have, that HR is more concerned with protecting the company's image than actually, genuinely caring for their employees.
The social media backlash was intense. People were calling it inhumane, toxic, some even questioning whether it was even legal to fire someone for basically admitting they're stressed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there was another layer that kind of emerged from this online discussion. Some people started to question whether the whole thing was even real. They suspected it might have been a PR stunt. That just gone terribly wrong.
Interesting.
Yep.
So what did Yes Madam have to say about all of this?
Well, they denied firing anyone. They claimed it was all a planned effort to raise awareness about workplace stress. They said those employees were actually offered what they called a break to reset.
A break to reset.
Mm.
That sounds like corporate jargon for getting fired.
Right. That's the question, isn't it? Was this a genuine attempt to start a conversation about a really serious issue? Or was it just damage control after a very public and very poorly executed PR stunt? There's even some evidence that points to this whole stunt theory. Shefali Bhatt, a tech journalist, she mentioned on X that a content creator had actually been approached to promote this whole stunt.
So even if it was staged, does that tell us anything about how HR is perceived?
Absolutely. This whole controversy really tapped into a very real and very widespread feeling that HR is often prioritizing the company's interests over the well-being of their employees. And it really brings us back to your initial question, right? Why do so many people see HR as a tool for management?
It almost feels like a betrayal. Like you're supposed to be the people that help us navigate the workplace, not the ones who push us out the door when things get tough.
Right. It raises some important questions. What is the purpose of these company-wide surveys? Shouldn't they be used to figure out what the problems are and then create positive change, not as a way to get rid of people?
You would think. And even if they were trying to raise awareness, couldn't they have done it in a way that didn't involve playing with people's livelihoods?
Absolutely. This Yes Madam case really highlights this very difficult ethical line that companies have to walk when they try to use sensitive topics for marketing and PR.
Yeah,
So,
it's a tough one for
yeah.
sure.
It is, yeah. It's a complex issue for sure, and it goes beyond any one company or incident. I think to really understand why HR sometimes seems to be working for management, we need to think about how the role of HR has changed over time.
Okay, so historically, how did HR departments even come about?
Well, initially they were really there to manage personnel and make sure companies were following all the labor laws. So it was a lot about, protecting the company from legal risks. And that sometimes put them in a position where they were kind of at odds with what individual employees needed.
So you're saying that some of that kind of historical baggage might still be influencing how HR operates today?
Exactly. But at the same time, the workplace is changing so rapidly. Employees are demanding more support, more work-life balance, a greater sense of purpose in their jobs. And that's where you start to see some real tension.
Between the old way of doing things and these new expectations.
Exactly. Some companies are embracing this shift, investing in mental health resources,
Yeah.
promoting flexible work arrangements, and really creating cultures that value employee feedback. But there are definitely still plenty of companies that are kind of stuck in that old school mindset, where HR is seen as like an extension of management, focused on control and compliance.
And that's where this perception of HR as like a tool for management comes from.
Yeah, in part, I think so. When HR is primarily focused on enforcing rules and protecting the company from liability, it can create this dynamic where employees feel like they're not being heard or supported.
So in those cases, who is advocating for employees?
Ideally, HR should be that advocate. They have this unique position within a company to bridge the gap between management and employees, to promote a culture of well-being, and to ensure that people feel valued and respected.
But that requires like a shift in mindset,
Right.
right? Both from HR professionals themselves and from company leadership.
Absolutely. It requires a willingness to move beyond this kind of traditional transactional view of HR and embrace a more human-centered approach.
So it sounds like there's a real need for HR to redefine its role in the modern workplace, move away from being the policy police, and become true advocates for employee well-being.
I totally agree, and I think the Yes Madam case, regardless of whether it was real or not, has really brought this issue to the forefront. It's forced us to ask some tough questions about the role of HR and the responsibilities of companies towards their employees.
So let's talk about solutions for a minute. What can companies do to create a more supportive, less stressful work environment? One where employees actually feel like they have somebody in their corner.
But I think, for starters, companies need to acknowledge that workplace stress is a real problem with real consequences.
And not just something employees need to toughen up and deal with.
Exactly. They need to move beyond these superficial solutions, like, offering a few days of de-stress leave, and actually address the systemic issues that are contributing to employee stress.
Like what kinds of issues?
Well, things like, promoting work-life balance, setting clear expectations around working hours, encouraging employees to actually take breaks.
So creating a culture where people feel comfortable disconnecting from work after hours without fear of, getting in trouble or something.
Exactly. It's about setting realistic workloads and deadlines, providing the resources and support that people need, and recognizing that employees have lives outside of work.
Yeah. And what about mental health? That seems to be a growing concern in today's workplaces.
Absolutely. Companies need to provide mental health resources and support for employees who are struggling. This could involve offering employee assistance programs, access to counseling services, or even just creating a more open and supportive environment where people feel comfortable talking about mental health.
So it's about normalizing the conversation and making it clear that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. And it's also about training managers to recognize the signs of stress and burnout in their teams and to provide support, because often managers are that first line of defense when it comes to employee well-being.
So addressing workplace stress really requires a multi-pronged approach. It involves changes at the individual level, at the team level, and at the organizational level.
Absolutely. And it requires a commitment from leadership to make employee well-being a top priority, because ultimately a happy and healthy workforce is a more productive and engaged workforce.
Which benefits everyone in the end.
Exactly. It's not just about altruism. It's about creating a sustainable and thriving business.
And that brings us back to HR. If they're going to be effective advocates for employees, they need to have a seat at the table where those big decisions are being made.
I couldn't agree more. HR should be involved in strategic planning, not just reacting to problems after they've already happened. They need to be empowered to influence company culture, advocate for employee-friendly policies, and ensure that employee well-being is considered in all those business decisions.
So it's about moving beyond this idea of HR as purely administrative and recognizing their potential to be a real driving force for positive change within a company.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to see that shift happen in some organizations.
Which is encouraging.
It is, but there's still a long way to go. And cases like this Yes Madam controversy remind us that we need to keep pushing for progress.
So what can employees do when they feel like HR isn't on their side, when they feel like their concerns are being dismissed or ignored?
That's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. I think it depends on the specific situation and the company culture. But one thing employees can do is try to understand the constraints that HR is operating under.
You mean like the legal obligations and company policies?
Exactly. Having that understanding can help employees communicate their needs more effectively. It can also help them identify potential allies within HR. Because believe it or not, there are a lot of HR professionals out there who genuinely care about employee well-being and want to make a positive difference.
So it's not about painting all of HR with the same brush.
Right. It's about recognizing that there's a spectrum, and there are individuals within HR who are trying to make things better.
But it also requires employees to be proactive about advocating for their own needs and well-being.
Absolutely. Employees need to be willing to speak up, to voice their concerns, and to push for change when it's necessary.
And to remember that they have a right to be treated with respect and dignity in the workplace.
Exactly. And that their well-being is not something that should be sacrificed for the sake of profits or productivity.
It sounds like building a more supportive and humane work culture is going to require a multifaceted approach.
It will. It requires a commitment from both companies and employees to create a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and supported.
And where HR is seen as a partner, not an adversary.
Precisely.
So we've talked a lot about the role of HR and this issue of workplace stress. But let's circle back to this Yes Madam case for a moment. Even if it was a PR stunt, it clearly resonated with a lot of people. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it tapped into this very real anxiety that a lot of people are feeling about the nature of work today, the fear of being replaced, the pressure to constantly perform, the feeling of being disposable.
It feels like the balance of power has shifted in recent years. Companies seem to have more leverage than ever before.
Yeah, I think that's a valid observation. We're seeing these trends play out all over the world. The rise of automation, the gig economy, the increasing demands of the modern workplace. It's a lot for people to navigate.
And it's creating this sense of uncertainty and insecurity for a lot of workers. So what can we do, both as individuals and as a society, to create a more humane and sustainable future of work?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think it requires a multifaceted approach.
So let's break it down. What are some things that individuals can do?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to be proactive about your own well-being.
So things like setting boundaries, prioritizing self-care, seeking support when you need it.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and grind. But it's essential to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally.
And to remember that your worth isn't defined by your job or your productivity.
Right. It's about finding that balance between work and life and making sure that you're not sacrificing your health and well-being in the process.
And what about things that companies can do? We've already touched on some of this, but it's worth reiterating, I think.
Definitely. Companies need to create cultures that value and support their employees.
So offering flexible work arrangements, providing mental health resources, fostering a sense of community and belonging.
Yeah. And promoting work-life balance, discouraging overwork, setting realistic expectations.
And maybe even rethinking the whole performance review system, which I think can be really stressful and demoralizing for people.
That's a great point. There are a lot of really interesting new approaches to performance management that focus on growth and development and feedback, rather than just metrics and rankings.
And what about on a societal level? What can we do as a society?
Well, I think it's important to have this broader conversation about the role of work in our lives and how we can create a system that is more equitable, sustainable, and fulfilling.
So things like exploring alternative work models, like universal basic income or a shorter work week, and investing in education and training to prepare people for the jobs of the future.
Yeah, and addressing these systemic issues like income inequality, access to healthcare, affordable housing. All of these things can contribute to stress and instability.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done.
There is, but I'm optimistic that we can create a better future of work, one that is more humane, more sustainable, and more equitable.
I agree. And I think this Yes Madam case, for all the controversy it generated, has actually sparked some really important conversations.
It has. It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the way we work.
And to start asking some really tough questions about what we value, how we treat each other, and what kind of future we want to create.
Exactly. And I hope that those conversations continue, because that's where real change begins.
Yeah, it really is. It's empowering to think that we're not just, cogs in a machine. That we can actually shape the way we work and what our companies value.
I completely agree. And, I think this Yes Madam case, whether it was real or not, really highlighted the power of collective action. I mean, the public outcry on social media forced that company to respond, to defend what they did. It showed that people are paying attention and they're not afraid to speak out against practices that they think are unfair or unethical.
It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly. And that's why transparency is so important, especially when it comes to HR practices. Employees have a right to know how decisions are being made that affect their livelihoods.
So if a company's genuinely committed to employee well-being, they should be open about their policies, their processes,
Hmm.
and how they're addressing concerns.
Absolutely. And they should be willing to engage in dialogue with employees, to
Yeah.
listen to their feedback,
Yeah.
and to make changes when they need to, because ultimately a culture of trust and mutual respect is so essential for a healthy and productive work environment.
Speaking of trust, let's talk about company-wide surveys for a second. You mentioned earlier that they should be used to identify issues and create positive change, not as a way to get rid of people. But how can employees be sure that their feedback is actually being taken seriously?
That's a great question. And it's a valid concern because unfortunately, there are companies out there that use surveys just as a way to gather information without any real intention of acting on it. But there are also companies that are genuinely committed to using surveys as a tool for improvement.
So how can you tell the difference? What are some signs that a company is actually, interested in employee feedback?
Well, one sign is that they actually follow up. On the survey results, they share the findings with employees. They explain what specific actions they're going to take based on the feedback, and they provide regular updates on the progress they're making.
So it's about transparency and accountability.
Exactly. And it's also about creating a culture where feedback is welcomed and valued, where employees feel safe to share their honest opinions without fear of being punished for it.
So it's not just about the survey itself. It's about the broader context within the company.
Precisely. If a company has a history of dismissing employee concerns or retaliating against people who speak up, then a survey is probably not going to be seen as a genuine attempt to make things better.
That makes sense. So it sounds like it's really up to the company to create an environment where surveys can actually be a tool for positive change. But what about individual employees? What can they do to make sure their voices are heard?
Well, I would encourage employees to participate in surveys whenever they have the opportunity. Even if they're feeling skeptical, it's important to use every chance you have to give feedback.
So don't just sit back and complain. Actually take the time to fill it out.
Exactly, and be as specific and constructive as possible in your feedback. Instead of just saying things are bad, give concrete examples of what's not working and offer suggestions for how things could be improved.
And if you're really concerned about something, don't just rely on the survey. Go talk to your manager or your HR rep, somebody who can actually address your concerns.
Absolutely, and if you're not comfortable going through official channels, you could try to find allies at work who share your concerns. There's power in numbers, and a collective voice is often more effective than a solitary one.
So it's about being proactive and persistent in advocating for your needs and well-being.
Absolutely, and it's about remembering that you have a right to a safe, respectful, and supportive work environment.
I think that's a really important point to end on. We've talked a lot about the complexities of the workplace, the evolving role of HR, and the challenges of navigating a system that doesn't always put employee well-being first. But it's crucial to remember that you have a voice, you have agency, you have the power to create positive change.
I agree. And I think that's a message that's especially relevant, given this Yes, Madam controversy, real or not. It sparked a conversation that we need to have. It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the way we work and to start asking some tough questions about the role of HR, the responsibilities of companies, and the rights of employees.
And hopefully, it's inspired us to take action, to speak up, to advocate for ourselves and for each other, to create a future of work that is more humane, more equitable, and more fulfilling for everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating exploration of the world around us.